Today, we're talking about Wyoming LLCs. I will briefly explain the key reasons why they are preferred by so many investors and practical ways to utilize them. Topics like asset protection and anonymity will come up. You should definitely pay attention today. Today's content is also a response to a comment question. Someone commented on a video I made about why I use Delaware corporations, suggesting that it would be great if I also covered Wyoming holding companies. So I thought about why I hadn't talked about Wyoming before, and even though this is a response to a comment, it's a topic worth covering in a full video. I decided to choose it. Before we dive into why Wyoming LLCs are favored by many investors, the reasons, practical applications, advantages, and considerations we should keep in mind. This channel provides professional information on U.S. law, tax law, and financial planning in an easy-to-understand way. Not just this video. We will also upload more beneficial content in other videos and in the future. Please make sure not to miss it. To do so, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Now, when we talk about Wyoming LLCs, let's briefly talk about the concept of an LLC. Stands for Limited Liability Company. In Korean, it seems to be called a 유한자금회사 Limited Liability Company. It's a business structure that legally separates personal assets from the business assets you've invested in. In simple terms, when doing business through an LLC, the investor is able to protect their other assets, those not invested in the LLC, from business debts or lawsuits. Because of these advantages, LLCs are widely used today as a form of business entity. Wyoming is said to be the first state in the U.S. to introduce this LLC system. So, since then, which was probably 1977, it has become a very popular choice among small business investors. Especially, as I will mention later, the Wyoming LLC. When compared to LLCs in other states, it offers privacy protection, asset protection, and also lower taxes and maintenance costs. It stands out in these aspects, so it can be said to be a state that many investors utilize. Now, let's take a look at what features and advantages it has. The first advantage is privacy protection. When establishing an LLC, we refer to the shareholders of the LLC. The owners, who can be called the proprietors, are referred to as members. And also, while the members can directly manage the LLC, there are cases where a manager is appointed. So, there are members and managers, who would be the executives. These can be considered very important participants. In such cases, their identities are not required to be disclosed. Therefore, if the investors or founders wish, they can maintain anonymity. That means the state government. There are records that are disclosed, you know. On websites, for example, it means you can't find the owner. Thus, it's an attractive feature for investors who don't want to expose the scale of their assets or ownership. So, in reality as well. As I will mention shortly, if you use a Wyoming LLC as a parent company to own real estate businesses in other states, you can enjoy a significant portion of these benefits, which is another advantage. Now, the second point is asset protection. This means that when you invest personal assets into a business activity, you intend to limit the risk from that business activity to just the investment within the company. It prevents such risks from transferring to your personal assets, and in technical terms, this is called the corporate veil. The veil of a corporate entity refers to its shell, and through this, the basic mechanism to protect eBay members, individuals, from risks or liabilities arising from the LLC is particularly strong in Wyoming. The LLC law in Wyoming. Let's say there is a creditor who has done business with the LLC. In case they raise an issue, it is proposed that they cannot directly seize the member's shares or forcibly execute the company's assets. Instead, this is called a charging order. But there are cases where the member receives dividends according to the LLC's decision-making. In such cases, it allows the creditor to exercise their claim only on the dividends or profit distributions under the main LHC law, which is said to be very advantageous for investors. And furthermore, was it in 2016 that the state of Wyoming amended the LHC law to pierce the corporate veil, as mentioned earlier, and made the conditions for holding individual members accountable more stringent. So, these factors create a very favorable environment for asset protection. Third point is, you can consider the low costs and tax burdens. This isn't a huge factor, but it's a few $100s, so it's still lower than other states. The cost of establishing and maintaining an LHC in Wyoming, it's the lowest in the United States. Does it cost about $100 to establish a new one? It costs a little over $100. Also, the annual report fee is very low. I think it was less than $100. Of course, in other states, it's not outrageously expensive. But for example, in Delaware, the Delaware franchise fee is about $300, and Nevada is at a similar level. It costs about $300 to $400. In that sense, the maintenance cost is cheap. And in terms of taxes as well, Wyoming is one of the few states with no corporate or income tax. Therefore, those aspects would also work to your advantage. Of course, even though Wyoming doesn't have a state income tax, if you establish your business in Wyoming but operate in another state, you'll still incur income taxes from that other state. So, the fact that Wyoming doesn't have a state income tax isn't an enormous benefit by itself. However, if you do business in Wyoming, you won't be subject to state income tax. The fourth is legal stability. Like Delaware, which we talked about earlier, Wyoming is also known for its business-friendly legal system. So, the environment, especially related to LLCs, is very stable. It is structured favorably for investors. As I mentioned earlier, it's the first state in the U.S. to introduce LLCs. Since a primary source of income from operating these LLCs, considering those aspects, you can see that they have accumulated related laws and precedents over a long period. And the fifth point, which aligns with the previously mentioned low maintenance costs, can be described as simple registration and maintenance regulations. The procedures required for establishment and operation are very simplified, so most of the process can be conducted online. This includes residents of other states, or even foreigners. You can easily complete the registration without having to go to Wyoming. There are no complicated or separate document requirements. Unlike some other states, there is no obligation to submit an operating agreement, which corresponds to the bylaws of an LLC. Considering all these factors, it can be said that registration and maintenance are very simple. So, if you compare this with other states, Delaware and Nevada are known as states that are particularly favorable for establishing an LLC. These states are still good. However, if we were to differentiate, in the case of Delaware, it is traditionally famous as a preferred location for corporate establishment by large companies. This is due to the expertise of the state courts. As I mentioned in another video, there are far more precedents compared to other states. And regarding the court's rulings, it's a type of court where the judge, not a jury, makes the decision, known as the Chancery Court. These aspects are considered business-friendly. However, in the case of small LLCs, the costs don't seem to be better than those in Wyoming. And in terms of privacy, it's not as strong as Wyoming, so considering these aspects, we would choose between Delaware and Wyoming. Next, Nevada as well. It's actually good. Along with Wyoming, it's one of the representative states where non-residents establish LLCs in the form of paper companies or holding companies. Recently, Nevada's policies have changed a bit, so its appeal has somewhat decreased. The fees have also increased a bit, and the protection of anonymity has traditionally benefited of Nevada LLCs, but it seems that regulations in those areas are becoming stricter. Now, the remaining topic would be whether it is still advantageous to establish a Wyoming LLC if you're doing business in another state. For example, let's say you're in the real estate rental business in Hawaii. In that case, what procedures would you go through? And what advantages might there be? Or are there any additional obligations you would need to bear? This would be a case where you establish an LLC in Wyoming but actually conduct business or investments in another state. In that case, simply establishing an LLC in Wyoming is not enough. Because in that other state, for example, Hawaii as mentioned earlier, if you engage in continuous and repetitive business activities, even if the LLC is established in another state, it is considered to be conducting business under Hawaii's laws, which require separate registration and compliance. So in this case, you would end up establishing in Wyoming and registering as a foreign company doing business in Hawaii. This means you would need to comply with Hawaii's registration requirements and tax laws. In that regard, there might be something like this. Earlier, we talked about the advantages of Wyoming LLC, with the first being anonymity and privacy. So, when you register in Hawaii, you have to follow Hawaii's registration regulations. Even if you can secure anonymity in Wyoming, if Hawaii's regulations don't support that, then the anonymity will be compromised. So, I think we have to acknowledge that there are limitations. Why? Because it's a Hawaii registration. Some clients, like in a recent case of ours, want to establish a Wyoming LLC because they do a lot of business with various people and don't want to disclose that they own an LLC. Here, it's not because they're doing anything bad, but for that reason, they want to establish it, while their actual business is investing in Hawaii real estate. So, I also mentioned the limitations regarding this. This might be an aside, but if you really want privacy, it's more advantageous to combine a trust with an LLC rather than just using an LLC alone. However, that's not today's topic, so let's move on. Nevertheless, the good thing about a Wyoming LLC is that it remains valid in terms of asset protection. As mentioned earlier, the operation of an LLC, the responsibilities of its members, and such are ultimately very dependent on where it was established, and the regulations or laws of that state are important. Even if you are operating in Hawaii, it's worth keeping in mind that the benefits provided by Wyoming in terms of legal protection remain valid. For example, let's say a dispute arises with a tenant, since we talked about real estate investment in Hawaii, so damages Assume a lawsuit has been filed. Then, this lawsuit will likely proceed in a Hawaii court because the real estate is in Hawaii. However, since the LLC is registered in Wyoming, enforcing the judgment from this, and in the case that I lost, an unfavorable judgment was issued, it's likely that Wyoming law will apply when it comes to transferring this to my personal assets. Therefore, it means that it would be difficult for any creditor or other interested party to directly take a member's share or easily penetrate any veil of the LLC. In that regard, it suggests that you can still enjoy a significant portion of the benefits of asset protection. In conclusion, in summary, the Wyoming LLC is a very attractive business structure for investors, especially in situations involving small-scale investments, self-employment, or not having a large number of investors. It is a business-friendly state worth considering. Therefore, for those who fall into this category, considering a Wyoming LLC is meaningful. And these benefits include protecting privacy, providing asset protection mechanisms, and having no income tax or low maintenance and setup costs. By balancing these advantages effectively, from small-scale real estate investments to investors managing a diverse range of assets, this structure allows for broad utilization. As I mentioned earlier, if you establish in Wyoming but conduct business in another state, you must comply with the laws of that state. Also, recently, there's what's called the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act, which is being strengthened at the federal level to enhance corporate transparency by requiring small businesses to report their actual to the government. Considering such factors, assuming that privacy is absolutely guaranteed might be a bit naive. Nevertheless, the advantages offered by a Wyoming LLC compared to other states are still valid. Taking those aspects into account, I think it's not a bad idea to consider a Wyoming LLC when planning future investments. That's all for now. I hope today's content was helpful. I believe there are many people around you who might need this information. This channel is a space for growth together with you. Please subscribe and like so you don't miss out on essential information next time. Also, I ask you to help spread this information to those around you. Thank you.